Bordeaux. The history of Bordeaux is long and rich, and its beginnings take us back almost 2,000 years to when the Romans first planted grapes here in the southwest of France. Ever since then, important wines have been made here. In this short course, there is not enough time to learn the region's entire history, so we're going to fly in Bordeaux. Many corporations have purchased chateaux in the region, and much money has been invested to modernize the winemaking techniques. Bordeaux remains the most revered and complicated region on earth, and when its wines are good, they are the best. Sweet, red, or white, a great wine from Bordeaux is always a special moment for a wine drinker. Remember that when you are serving a bottle of Bordeaux to a guest, you are part of this rich heritage. Now that you have a basic understanding of Bordeaux's history, it's time to take a closer look at the area's geography. By learning about the physical characteristics of the area, we'll start to get a sense of the region's terroir. As we progress through this short course, we'll look at some of the more prominent appellations in more detail. In this lesson, we're going to approach the region as a whole and learn about the location of Bordeaux, climate of Bordeaux, and the terroir of Bordeaux. Let's start by getting a better idea of where this region is by learning about the location of Bordeaux. This wine region is built around the city of the same name. Bordeaux is France's sixth largest city and lies 500 kilometers southwest of Paris. It is a port city and is built on the banks of the Garonne River, a tributary of the Gironde that flows out to the Atlantic Ocean. The Gironde River and its major tributaries, the Garonne and Dordogne, are the major geographical characteristics of the region. The Garonne and Dordogne meet here and flow into the Gironde, which pours into the Atlantic Ocean. Using these three rivers, we can divide the region into two main areas, the left bank and the right bank. South of the Gironde is the area known as the left bank. This flat, lower-lying land includes the famous regions of the Médoc and Grave. The area to the north of the Gironde is known as the right bank. In this gently sloping land, you find the famous sub-regions of Saint-Emilion and Pomerol. The land between the two banks is known as the Entre-deux-Mers. Much wine is made here, but little of it leaves the region, so our focus will be on the left and right banks. If you ever forget which is the left or right bank, Simply imagine yourself standing in the river, looking toward the sea. The left bank is on your left, and the right on your right. Easy. Between Bordeaux and the Atlantic Ocean grows Europe's largest forest. This protects the vines from strong ocean winds. We'll learn a little more about this later in the lesson. So here is Bordeaux, almost on the coast, riddled with rivers and set upon flat land. To understand how this all affects the vines, let's take a closer look at the climate of Bordeaux. As Bordeaux is just a few miles from the Atlantic, the region's climate is known as a maritime or oceanic. This sort of climate is characterized by wet springs, fairly gentle summers, and mild winters. The Gulf Stream, a warm Atlantic Ocean current, and the various rivers that crisscross Bordeaux exert a warming influence on the region. Thankfully, this influence is tempered by the forests that grow between the coast and Bordeaux, protecting the vineyards from strong, salty sea winds. These conditions mean the region is suited to growing the red grape varieties: Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and in lesser amounts, Malbec and Petit Verdot, and the white grape varieties Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, and Muscadel. We'll learn more about these varieties and what wines they are used for later in the course. Finally, let's understand how the climate, location, and soil types combine to create the terroir of Bordeaux. The idea of terroir is vitally important in Bordeaux. Terroir is the idea that a wine can be known by its place. It means that a wine should taste of the place it is from. Terroir is made up of all sorts of influences, including climate, soil, topography, and more. We know that because Bordeaux is located near the sea, it is allowed to be warm enough to just grow grapes. But what about the soils the vines are planted in? Speaking very generally, there are two major types of soil in Bordeaux. One is based on limestone and can be found across the region. And the other is sandy gravel, mostly seen in the Médoc, Grave, and Sauternes. Along with this, you have various amounts of clay and loam. The region is probably best known for its deep, gravelly soils that force the roots deep into the earth. This gravel absorbs heat during the day and can keep the vines warm in the evening. In this lesson, we've looked at Bordeaux from a bird's-eye view. We have understood where the region is, how it can be divided into the left and right banks, and have learnt about its climate and soil types that create its terroir. But remember, no wine is made in such general conditions. Each vineyard has varying exposure to sunlight, different temperatures in the air and in the soil. Each one's elevation, natural drainage, and access to water is different. So far, we've broken Bordeaux into the left and right banks. Unfortunately, the wines of the region are not labelled as right and left bank. They are broken down into smaller appellations or areas. Bordeaux has 57 official appellations. These are far too many to learn about in this short course. So we're going to break down the left and right banks into smaller parts, and then understand more about why wines are classified in Bordeaux. In this lesson, we'll learn about Appellations, Bordeaux's major appellations, and Bordeaux's system of classification. Let's start by understanding what appellations are. The Appellation d'Origine Contrôlée, or AOC, is an organization created by the French government to give certain areas official status for their agricultural products based on their terroir. This means that wines from Bordeaux are named after the place or appellation where the grapes are grown, rather than the variety of grape used to make them. Each appellation comes with a certain set of rules, such as permissible grape varieties, alcohol level, and various winemaking techniques. If a winemaker does not follow these rules, the name of the appellation cannot appear on the wine's label. Next, we'll look at Bordeaux's major appellations. To make understanding Bordeaux's 57 appellations easier, the region can be broken down into some general areas. Let's take a look at these areas and the appellations in them that we will focus on in the next 3 lessons. Starting with the left bank, we have the most important red wine region of them all, the Médoc. Commonly, the Médoc is used to refer to this region, from here almost at the mouth of the Gironde down to the city of Bordeaux. Inside this area, we will focus on the appellations of Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, and Margaux, all known for their Cabernet Sauvignon-based red wines. Moving further south, we find the next big general area, Graves. It starts on the southern side of the city and lies against the Garonne, all the way down to the town of Langon. This region produces red, white, and sweet wines. We will look more closely at the appellations of Pessac-Léognan, Sauternes, and Barsac. On the other side of the river from Graves, we find the vast area of Entre-deux-Mers. As an appellation, you will only see its name on bottles of the region's humble white wines, but much of Bordeaux's cheaper red wines are made here, labelled under the appellation Bordeaux. We don't have the space to learn about this region in detail on this course, but there are many good red wines being produced here, and they are getting better all the time. On the other side of Entre-deux-Mers is the area known as the right bank. The French call it Libournais, after the region's main town, Libourne. This region is on the right bank of the Dordogne, and we will be focusing on 2 of its appellations, Saint-Emilion and Pomerol, and their rich and polished Merlot-based wines. Now that we know where the appellations we are going to learn about are located, let's find out more about Bordeaux's system of classification. The 57 appellations in Bordeaux consist of around 10,000 chateaux and domains working on 120,000 hectares of land. This is a lot of wine, and it is very difficult to know what's good and what's not. To make sense of all this wine, Bordeaux has, for over 150 years, classified their best wines according to quality. The best producers can then print their classification on their wine's label. Like with everything in Bordeaux, it is unfortunately not simple. Bordeaux has 6 different classifications for different areas in the region, and not all of the regions in Bordeaux are classified. As we deal with the regions in more detail, we will discuss the classifications they use. But it is important now to know about the most famous classification of them all, the 1855 Médoc classification. In 1855, Napoleon III requested that the best wines of Bordeaux be arranged according to quality, so they could be easily showcased to the world. The resulting classification is still used, almost unchanged, today. The producers were judged on quality and placed into one of 5 growths. The first growths are the highest ranked, down to 5th growths. Being classified as a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th or 5th growth is still very important today, as it allows the wines made to immediately be regarded as high quality. This classification is only used for the wines of the Médoc, but the other systems that we will learn about later have all been created for the same reason, even if they use slightly different names. The importance of Bordeaux's classifications have been to create iconic wines like the first growths of the Médoc. Wines such as Mouton, Lafite, and Margaux are world famous and helps market the whole region of Bordeaux. It also helps you know immediately the general quality of the wine you are serving. The red wines of Bordeaux are known for their richness, tannins, and ability to age for many years, becoming smoother, more complex, and of course more expensive. In this lesson, we're going to find out why by learning about red winemaking in Bordeaux. Each chateau will have their own winemaking techniques that make them different, but generally we can break down how red wines are made in Bordeaux into 9 steps. Step 1. Harvest. Grapes are picked in the middle of September. It's common for the grapes to be picked by hand, but sometimes machines are used. The grapes are then sorted by hand or machine to make sure every grape is of a good quality. Step 2. Destemming and crushing. Typically, all the fruit is taken off the stems and crushed. The resulting mixture of juice and skin is called the must and is moved to either stainless steel tanks or wooden vats for fermentation. Step 3. Alcoholic fermentation. Most commonly, stainless steel tanks are used for fermentation, although some chateaux still only use wooden vats. The temperature of the fermentation is controlled and is generally between 25 and 32 degrees Celsius. Fermentation is completed in around 8 to 10 days. Step 4. Maceration. Maceration is the time the juice spends in contact with the skins to extract color. This can take anywhere between 15 to 30 days, so will only be completed after fermentation is finished. During this time, the juice has to be pumped over the cap of skins that form at the top of the tank, or the cap is pushed down into the juice, so the skins are kept moist and color can be extracted. Step 5. Pressing and malolactic fermentation. After maceration is complete, the juice is pressed from the cap and transferred to wood or stainless steel vats. The juice that runs freely from the tank is known as free-run juice. Pressed juice comes from pressing the skins to release trapped juice. Because pressed juice has had more contact with the high tannin-containing skins and seeds, it is more tannic than free-run juice. Some chateaux keep different press runs separate. For example, gently pressed wine is put in one barrel, harder pressed in another, and hardest pressed in yet another. After the wine has been pressed and moved into either a vat or barrel, the temperature is maintained at 16 to 20 degrees Celsius, and malolactic fermentation occurs over the next 12 to 15 days. Malolactic fermentation is the conversion of harsh-tasting malic acid into softer-tasting lactic acid. Step 6. Blending. Making good red wine in Bordeaux has a lot to do with blending. All the red wines from the region are blends of different varieties. Blending practices differ between chateaux. Some blend before the wines go into the barrels, while others age different varieties separately in barrels first before blending them and letting the blended wine age further in the barrel. However it's done, the purpose of blending is to create a more balanced and complex wine. Each year, depending on the vintage conditions, the blends will change slightly, and the winemaker has to adjust the blend to keep the wine in the style of the chateau. The winemaker has to know each barrel personally and choose how they will all come together to make the perfect blend. Step 7. Maturation and racking. After malolactic fermentation is complete, the wine is placed into French oak barrels. Traditionally, these are 225 litres and are a mixture of new and old. As the wine ages in the barrel, it takes on spicy oak aromas and flavours. During this time, the lees, or dead yeast cells, settle at the bottom of the barrel. Every time this happens, the wine needs to be moved to a different barrel, leaving the lees behind. This is called racking. A wine in Bordeaux will generally be racked every 3 months, over a 15 to 18-month period before it is ready for bottling. Step 8. Fining. During this step, egg whites or powdered albumin, the protein from egg whites, is added to each barrel and stirred with a steel rod. This protein sinks to the bottom of the barrel, making sure the wine is clear as well as softening the tannins. Less egg whites are used today than they were in the past. Chateau Margaux, for example, uses 5 egg whites per barrel. After about 45 days, a final racking is done to remove the wine and leave behind the egg white sediment. Depending on the chateau, the wine may be filtered now before it is bottled. Step 9. Bottling. 2 years from the date of harvest, the wine is now ready to be bottled. The wines are racked from their barrels into a large tank, and the bottles are filled and the corks inserted. The wines will spend some time aging in the bottle before they are released. The left bank of Bordeaux is known for its long-lived Cabernet Sauvignon-based wines. To better understand these wines, in this lesson we're going to learn about the important appellations of the left bank. We'll be focusing on Saint-Estèphe, Pauillac, Saint-Julien, Margaux, and Pessac-Léognan. Let's start in the north with Saint-Estèphe and work our way down to the city of Bordeaux. Saint-Estèphe is the northernmost famous appellation of the Médoc. All of the appellations in the Médoc plant their vines in the gravel banks that run along the river. In Saint-Estèphe there is a little less gravel and more clay in the soil than those further upriver. This keeps the soil cooler and wetter and allows the wines to ripen wonderfully in hot, dry years. Generally speaking, the wines of Saint-Estèphe are fuller and with more acidity than other Médoc appellations. The wines are long-lived and equal any in Bordeaux. The best chateaux here are Côte d'Estournel and Montrose, both second growths. They produce dark-coloured and intensely flavoured wines that can take up to 20 years to reach maturity. Next, let's find out about Saint-Estèphe's neighbour, Pauillac. No other area in Bordeaux has so many fine vineyards and producers than Pauillac. 3 out of the 5 first growths of the 1855 classification are found here: Latour, Lafite Rothschild, and Mouton Rothschild. These wines, some of the most expensive in the world, will develop for 10 to 20 years before reaching something like perfection. But many other wines from this appellation have what Bordeaux lovers are after: the combination of fresh, soft fruit flavors, dryness, a touch of cigar box spice, and a hint of sweetness. The vines here reach their deepest, and there are many high-quality chateaux, including Chateau Bataillé, Pontet-Canet, and Lynch-Bages. While the wines express their terroir differently, it is the tannic, rich, and long-lived Cabernet Sauvignon character that dominates all of their blends. From Pauillac, we carry on south to Saint-Julien. Saint-Julien is the little brother of the Médoc. It's the smallest of the big four and doesn't have any of the first growths in it, but what it lacks in size, it makes up for in consistency. The mounds of gravel are either close to the river or slope southward into a valley, both perfect for vineyards, and have resulted in Saint-Julien having the highest proportion of clustered growths than any commune in Bordeaux. The wines are dense, smooth and savoury, becoming round and gentle in maturity. Château Léoville-Baton is one of the top producers, along with Léoville-Lacasse and Ducreux-Beaucaillot. And finally, to finish off the top four of the Médoc, let's pay a visit to Margaux at the south of the Médoc. The soils in Margaux are the thinnest and most filled with gravel. So much so that the vine's roots can go as deep as 7 meters to look for their small supply of water. This means that the wines can be thin in poor years, but in the best years the wines are the most fragrant and polished in the Médoc. The wines that reach these heights most often are those from the first growth Château Margaux and third growth Château Palmer. While the region isn't as consistent as Saint-Julien, the wines are improving, and the finest wines from Margaux are wonderfully perfumed, refined and subtle. Now we're going to jump over the city of Bordeaux and into Grave to focus on the appellation of Pessac-Léognan. The region of Grave was the first to establish the reputation of Bordeaux when its wines were shipped back to England as far back as the 12th century. The name Grave comes from gravel, and the best soils here are gravel-rich and mixed with clay and sand. The best wines of the region are found in Pessac-Léognan. Here you find the only first growth outside of the Médoc, Château Haut-Brion. The wines here are also predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon and are known for their aromas of tobacco, earth and caramel. Other important producers are Château Latour Haut-Brion, La Vie Haut-Brion, Pape Clément, Haut-Bailly, and Domaine de Chevalier. The whites of this region are also very fine, and we'll take a closer look at them later in the course. Well done on learning more about the wines of the left bank. All of these wines are blends led by the Cabernet Sauvignon. It is arguably the truest and most historic expression of this grape anywhere in the world. We're now going to explore Merlot country, the right bank. Running along the right bank of the Dordogne is the dynamic and exciting region known by locals as Libournais, after the traditional capital of Libourne. In this lesson, we're going to focus on the two best-known appellations, Pomerol and Saint-Emilion, finding out what sets their wines apart and who the best-known producers are. We will finish off this lesson with learning how to read the label of a bottle of wine from Bordeaux. So in this lesson, we'll learn about Pomerol, Saint-Emilion, and how to read a Bordeaux label. Pomerol is the smallest of Bordeaux's major appellations. It has only around 150 producers, farming about 750 hectares of vineyards. The producers here are also small, with many only producing as little as 1,000 cases of wine a year. Unlike the left bank, there has never been a classification of Pomerol wines. But the wines they do produce are quite incredible. The soil here is, like the left bank, a big bank of gravel, but the finest vineyards are planted on a rich seam of clay that runs through the region. This clay is perfect for the Merlot grape. dense clay soils slow down the ripening of Merlot grapes. This means the grapes that are harvested are rich and ripe, producing similarly dense, rich wines. The blends of Pomerol are mostly Merlot, with small additions of some Cabernet Franc. These wines are deep in color, have less tannin and acidity than their left bank neighbors, and are characterized by rich, plummy flavors. Most of all, their greatest wines are known for a wonderful concentration. The vines that are planted on the clay soils produce the densest, fleshiest wines of the region. Because this is such a small area, the wines from the region are scarce and very expensive. Two of the best-known producers are Château Petrus and Le Pin. Next, let's learn more about Pomerol's bigger neighbor, Saint-Emilion. Saint-Emilion is one of the biggest producing appellations in Bordeaux and bottles more wine than the whole of the Médoc. The wines from the region are quite diverse, even though the predominant grapes are Merlot and Cabernet Franc. This diversity comes from the different soil types that spread out across the region. A mix of limestone, clay and gravel soils produce very different wines. The grapes grown on clay produce rich and fleshy wines, and those planted in sandy gravel soils will be lighter and more restrained. The best producers here are Château Ozon, Cheval Blanc, Angelou, and Pavie. These producers, like other wines from the region, make wines that are ready to drink earlier than those from the left bank. Saint-Emilion is unique in that the classification of its vineyards are updated every 10 years. The best vineyards will have Premier Grand Cru Classé on the label, which is subdivided into A and B levels. And less fine vineyards will have Grand Cru Classé on the label. Now that we've learned a little about the two major appellations of the right bank, it's time to find out how to read a Bordeaux wine label. Sometimes when you look at a bottle of wine from Bordeaux, the label can be intimidating, especially if you don't speak French. But by remembering a few key phrases, you'll be able to read a bottle of wine from Bordeaux easily. First, let's start with vintage. Here on this bottle you can see the vintage. This is the year that the grapes were harvested. It's very important when serving any wines that the vintage on the bottle matches what a guest has asked for. Next is the name of the producer. Here you can see that the producer is Château Trollon-Mondot. This is the name of the brand or chateau who made the wine. But this doesn't necessarily mean the grapes are from where the producer is based. For that information, we need to look for the appellation name. On this bottle, the appellation is Margaux. This is where all the grapes used to make this wine are from. And can you tell which appellation this wine comes from? That's right, Pauillac. If you see this phrase, mise en bouteille au château, on a bottle like this, it means that the wine has been bottled at the chateau where it was made. Remember how we learned that some regions in Bordeaux have been classified? Well, if the wine has come from one of these regions and is classified, it will have this information printed on the bottle. For example, this wine from Saint-Emilion is in their first category of classification and is a Premier Grand Cru Classé, while this one is just a Grand Cru. This information gives you a good idea of the quality of wine in the bottle. Unfortunately, these will not always be on the label, or not always on the front of the label. You'll need to look for them on each bottle of Bordeaux you handle. Bordeaux is best known for its Cabernet and Merlot-based blends. But it is also home to some of the most famous, long-living sweet wines in the world, as well as some fantastic white wines. In this lesson, we're going to learn about Sauternes and the white wines of Bordeaux. Right in the south of Bordeaux, below Grave, is the area known as Sauternes, where some of the finest sweet wines in the world are made. What makes this area so special and its sweet wines so complex is its specific climate. Not only good for growing Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon and Muscadel, the major varieties of the region, but also perfect for a very special fungus. Autumn mists are caused here by the cool waters of the Gironde River meeting the warmer waters of the Garonne. When these mists settle over the grapes during the evening and through the night, they provide the perfect conditions for a particular type of mold to grow, Botrytis cinerea, or noble rot. All other funguses have a terrible effect on grapes, but Botrytis cinerea is different. This fungus feeds on the water of the grapes and leaves behind the sugar, acids and flavor compounds of the grape. The shriveled brown berries each have a tiny bit of very sweet, very flavorful juice. The fungus not only concentrates the sugar in the grapes, but also subtly changes the flavor, adding great complexity to every grape. To turn this juice into the great sweet wines of the region is no easy task. The fungus is not reliable and is very dependent on the weather conditions. If it does grow, it will not cover all the grapes equally at the same time. So at harvest, producers have to pick vineyards up to 9 different times, each time picking only those grapes that have been affected by the fungus. Once the winemaker has picked the grapes, they will press out the small amount of juice and ferment it. This very sweet wine is then aged in small oak barrels. The finished wine is sweet, balanced by acidity, with a lovely complex richness, and can age for many, many years. Because it is so difficult to make great Sauternes, the prices for these wines are very high. The best producer in the region is Château d'Yquem. Sauternes was the only area outside the Médoc to be given a classification in 1855, and Château d'Yquem was ranked as a first great growth. The other area that is also an appellation known for making these sweet wines is Barsac. Generally, these wines are a little lighter than those from